I've been preaching for 42 years, not without a break. I know it may feel like it to you all, but there are pauses in between. It has been my honor and my duty to speak to major world events, from economic hardships that went global at times, the discovery and the spread of HIV and the AIDS virus, wars in the Middle East, invasions in Central America, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and innumerable civil rights issues regarding sexual orientation, race, and gender. But without exaggeration, I have never stood in a pulpit in a more precarious moment than this one. Even though tens of millions of Americans have already voted, the vote counting starts in 2 days, and I can only hope that by Wednesday morning we will know the results. American democracy is at stake, and as enormous as that claim is, it may not be as important as all that could be added to that claim, because the environment, civil rights, economic justice, foreign relationships, and for God's sake, human decency, civility, are literally on the presidential ballot this year. If you've not voted yet, please vote tomorrow or Tuesday. It is difficult to imagine how anyone could have a plausible reason to just sit this one out. In fact, we have a cancer patient in our congregation who has made it her goal on hospice to live long enough to vote in this election. And I have heard similar stories in the news from other people who are in peril for their lives, who are just holding on for this very election. As it happens, I will be out of the country on Election Day, just as I happened to be out of the country on Election Day in 2016, both times leaving it to our fearless associate pastor, David Ketchum, to face this microphone on the Sunday after the election. And David, I hope you've got something to celebrate when you come back to this microphone. I know I left you a poison pill last time, and I just hope it doesn't go that way. But as David and I have discussed this task before us, not just in the coming week, but in the coming months, we've agreed that as important as voting is, we don't get to just vote our way into the kind of great society that we would like to be a part of. The past 4 years has seen a coarsening of society. Virtues of honesty, integrity, compassion, the kind of compassion that makes it possible for someone who is a national or a global leader to still constantly consider the common good rather than their individual selfish interests. The morality that gives strength to families and to civilizations. The institutions that we depend on to hold us together, they've all eroded, and too often they're just being ignored. Like me, you've probably heard about the compromising scene in Sacha Baron Cohen's new Borat subsequent movie film that has just been released. It includes a scene involving the president's personal attorney, the former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. And though he claims that this scene of him lying on a hotel bed with his hands in his pants while a young actress hovers over him, an actress that he believed was 15 years old from Eastern Europe, he insists that this was an innocent scene. Of course, Sacha Baron Cohen burst into the room before things went too far. But what remains is that Giuliani agreed to give an interview to a fawning, sexy 15-year-old. and then agreed to go to her hotel room for a drink and to relax. So call me crazy, but even though the deed did not happen, it seems unavoidable that this high-ranking federal figure was perfectly willing to have sex with a child. And what I find to be a complicating awareness is that these photos, this information, has actually been available to the media since July. And I'm just now hearing about it. It did not become of interest to the media until the Borat movie was about to be released. In our morally corrupt universe, someone as highly placed as Rudy Giuliani having sex in a hotel room with a teenager from Eastern Europe is no longer worthy of mention. We have been beaten down by the outrageous, the preposterous, the unprecedented crimes and behaviors, statements, even pedophilia that just doesn't seem to solicit more than a yawn from the public. We've gotten used to moral corruption, lies, treason, embezzling, emoluments, racism, and cruelty. One of our listeners, who's a young mother and a PhD candidate in New Zealand, was trafficked as a teenager. She was having sex with strangers for money when she was 15 years old. We talked about this case with Rudy Giuliani, and what she said to me in reaction to it was, I can tell you this, Roger, that Rudy is what society calls normal. I understand that during the nightmarish time in her life when she was trafficked, that the men who paid to have sex with her seemed to come from all walks of life. They were married men, they were fathers, they were professionals, they were senior citizens, they were the normal people that you see at the grocery store or the movie theaters. But I object to labeling them as normal. They might be common. There might be a legion of them. But they don't get to be normal. This is not acceptable. Michelle Obama famously said that she had counseled her daughters that when they were getting irrational criticism and attacks from the media and in social media, that when they go low, we go high. And I think that the Obamas succeeded in doing exactly that. They suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous and obscene criticisms, but they never stooped to the level of just giving it back the way it was given to them. Now, I have to confess that I have, and you've seen me do it. I listen to podcasts from the Young Turks and Bill Maher, and I have many times heard Bill Maher, and Sink Juncker literally yelling at Democrats to stop being so passive, to get down into the gutter with conservatives and fight like they fight, to duke it out with them. And when I think back over these past 4 years during the Trump administration about my overarching preaching catalog, I know that I've been much more loyal to the advice of Maher and Juncker than I have been to Michelle Obama. Maybe I needed to be tougher than most pastors. Most pastors wouldn't be allowed to be as tough as I've been. But I want to say this, that kind of rhetoric is not a plan for the future. On the very day that President John Kennedy was assassinated, November 22 of 1963, Kennedy had a speech prepared to deliver that evening, and a passage from that speech has become in some ways sort of his final advice to the nation. A passage in that speech says, "Neither the fanatics nor the faint-hearted are needed, and our duty as a party is not to our party alone, but to our nation, and indeed to all of humankind. our duty is not merely the preservation of our political power, but the preservation of peace and freedom. So let us not be petty when our cause is so great. Let us not quarrel amongst ourselves when our nation's future is at stake. Let us stand together with renewed confidence in our cause, united in our heritage of the past and our hopes for the future, and determined that this land we love shall lead all humankind into new frontiers of peace and abundance. I don't want any part of that to get past us. Neither fanatics nor the faint-hearted, not the heavily armed militia groups, nor friends of our own who say that I just don't watch the news anymore, I've just unplugged, I don't care about politics, I'm not voting anymore, I'm not getting involved. Neither of those extremes can help to save our fragile democracy and turn us back from the cliff of fascism. What we need, and I mean this very literally, what we need is fewer fanatics, fewer faint-hearted people, and more good people. Good people. And I don't mean nice or polite. As Elie Wiesel said, neutrality always serves the oppressor and never the oppressed. No matter who wins the election this week, there are going to be angry and disappointed people, and some of them will say and do things that will reach out and grab us by the hearts, and we'll want to go there. We'll want to dive into the mud and start fighting. But folks, good people can find a way to take sides, like Elie Wiesel says, to not just be silent, but to still be civil, to let them go low, but choose to go high. Our ultimate goal is to create a society that is simultaneously free and peaceful, in which we are continually reducing the percentage of our society that lives in poverty while increasing the percentage of our society that has health care and meaningful employment and real education. That's our ultimate goal. And as Kennedy said, considering what is at stake, considering how important it is for us to save democracy and civilization, it's too important for us to be petty. Nobody knows better than I do how satisfying a petty retort can be. But the stakes are too high now. I want to find a way in which I can continue to be disarmingly honest without being mean. And that is easier said than done. Much of what has divided our partisan nation is, in fact, the government's fault. From biblical times, when Jewish leaders used a collective fear of Canaanites and Philistines to unite the tribes of Israel into a single nation, all the way through history to our lifetime when President Reagan used Russia as an evil empire, and George Bush used Saddam in Iraq, and Trump uses fear of a nuclear Iran or of Hillary's emails to scare people into feeling that they have a common enemy. In almost every case, the real threat was nothing like what it was presented to be. And you go back and you think about any of these. Russia's got nuclear weapons, but you know, what was Iraq going to do? Were they going to jump in a bunch of refashioned 1950 Chevys and drive to the United States and invade? I mean, it just the suggestion of the threat. I mean, in the face of COVID, aren't you glad that Trump is dealing with Snapchat and Twitter and what's the other one that he's worried about? TikTok, yes, or Hillary's emails. In 1957, General Douglas MacArthur was invited to give a speech to the annual stockholders meeting of the military supplier, the Sperry Rand Corporation. And, you know, the military-industrial complex and the military have a real hand-in-hand relationship. So they had every reason to believe that a longtime general like him would come and that it would be a real love fest kind of speech. But this is what he said: "Our swollen budgets constantly have been misrepresented to the public. Our government has kept us in a perpetual state of fear, kept us in a continuous stampede of patriotic fervor with the cry of grave national emergency. Always there's been some terrible evil at home or some monstrous foreign power that was going to gobble us up if we did not blindly rally behind it, furnishing the exorbitant funds they demanded. Yet in retrospect, these disasters never happened. They never seem to be quite real. The government tries to unite a nation and win their unquestioning loyalty by keeping them afraid. And oftentimes what we're asked to be afraid of is nothing more than an imaginary boogeyman hiding under the bed. What if instead we tried to unite the nation around difficult to achieve goals, as when Kennedy announced that we were going to put astronauts on the moon, or when we set out to end polio and smallpox? What if we set out as a uniting goal, creating a renewable energy grid? What if we set out as a goal getting all of the trash and pollution and garbage out of the oceans? What if we said that in our lifetimes we were going to end poverty? I just want to invite you to remember back in the mid-1990s when the HIV virus was killing so many people. One day I was asked to come to the home of one of my church members who was HIV positive. And we sat in his living room and he told me, "Roger, I just wanted to share with you that I have reached the 5-year mark of being infected." And you could have knocked me down with a feather. I had buried so many of his peers who had moved in 1 or 2 years from diagnosis to death. And those who managed to live a little longer lived miserably as they wasted away. But this guy had made it to 5 years. And he had made it to 5 years by retrovirals, good health practices, good fortune. But he was at the tipping point where HIV/AIDS was going to become a livable condition, so that now we can actually drive the virus down so low that it becomes undetectable. That was something that was unimaginable 20 years ago. There are so many things, folks, that seem to be impossible until someone does it. We set a goal for ourselves to do something that seems unimaginable, that's never been done before. But if ending poverty becomes a unifying goal, that's technologically much less complicated than going to the moon. It's less complicated than driving HIV into the undetectable stage. And if we can do it, and we don't do it, are we good people? I don't see how we could be. Though I've been wrong so many times. There's a reason why I'm never interviewed on TV to predict the outcome of an election, because I am always wrong. But this time, I am fairly certain that Trump is going to lose re-election. I'm pretty sure. But even still, he will have 2 more months in office, during which time, I don't know about you all, but he seems like the kind of guy that might do some really bad stuff in 2 months. That, given 2 months to have lost an election, what he might do to try to negate the election results, even to the point of taking a military action that might allow him to claim some kind of mandate to stay in office. There's nothing that I would put past him. And so it's not just November 3 or 4 or 5, whenever all the ballots are counted. We've got a couple of months ahead of us that are going to be tough. In any event, I fully expect that very many of his cult-like followers will be so upset that there's a great likelihood that there will be violence. Terrible things will be said, and we all know that there is a potential for awful things to be done, because there are those who would like to start a civil war. I don't think we'll have a civil war, but I do think that there's a high likelihood that some of these militia groups will try their best to start a civil war. Given the deeply partisan divide in our nation, we can't assume that extreme acts of violence is just a fantasy. We can't dismiss it out of hand. What our nation will need on November 4th and November 5th and November 6th will be a literal army of good people who will not resort to violence, who will be firm in their devotion to character, to principles, to personal morality, to public values, and hope for America's future. Please, my friends, I beg you, don't get sucked into vitriolic exchanges. Social media can bring out the worst in all of us. So let's decide right now that we're not going to do it. There is nothing we have seen in either Trump or most of his followers that would make us think that they will lose with any kind of civil deportment. But we can be good people during the transition. We can be the glue that holds America together. Don't respond to an insult with an insult. Try, think about it now. When someone insults you, ask them to tell you more. Get them to talk. Get them to tell you what they're feeling. And more than that, why are they feeling that way? And what I want you to listen for, if you're able to do that, listen for what they are afraid of. Because fear is what is really driving this division. We've been primed by our government for centuries to respond to fear. We can't be surprised that so many people do. So listen to what they're afraid of and try to console them. That, how many elections have we heard that the Democratic candidate is going to take our guns? I don't have any, so they can come looking for them, but but I think we can remind our friends that are concerned about those things that Carter didn't come for your guns, and Clinton didn't come for your guns, and Obama didn't come for your guns, and it is unlikely that Biden will come for your guns. We can find out what they're afraid of and try to reassure them that, that the boogeyman of socialism, do they like their Medicare? Do they like getting Social Security? Do they like having public roads? Are they glad they don't have to dig a well and a septic tank in town? I mean, you just have to draw people into a realization that some aspects of doing things collectively as a nation is not that bad. But even still, some of these people are going to try to make you their enemy. Don't let them do that. Don't put that mantle on. Don't be their boogeyman. Don't accept that. You be the better person. It is not easy to not reply to abuse with a counterpunch. And that's why I wanted you to hear me saying it right now, because I want you to hold me accountable on this as well. That I've got more access to the media than most of you do. I can write articles. I can get printed in newspapers and magazines. I need to be a nice guy. You need to expect that of me. I need to be fearless, but I also need to be a gentleman. And I hope that we can all recognize that that's who we want to be. No one can make you be a bad person. No one can make you stoop to a mudslinging fight. You can choose who you are going to be during the transition. And I only ask you to remember what our goal is. Where do we want to be next year? What do we want to be 2 years later? So let's not be petty when our cause is so great. Thanks.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.